You want to just start? like,
You know, we can talk about anything you want, sir.
yeah, okay. So here we'll just throw in. What's up, bleh. What's up, everybody? Welcome to a new episode of Metric, the User Experience Design podcast. I'm here with Jason Griffey, who's been on the show several times before to talk about, I don't know, I kind of forget, kind of like bigger idea things like
Hmm.
chatbots and AI. But Jason, I was like working on a project with a library system up in North Carolina recently, and they're talking about how do they know like how people actually use their libraries. And so I already know that you've been doing Measure the Future with
Yep.
a couple of other people.
Hmm.
And I started kind of like pimping it, and not really. And I realized I didn't really know what the status of it was since it's been a
Sure.
while since I've been in library. So we're here to talk about your thing, which
Yeah.
is really cool. Let's just jump into it.
Sure thing.
People know who Jason is. If you don't, look at the show notes. I'm gonna have like a little about section or whatever. Let's talk Measure the Future. How would you? What is like the TLDR?
Yeah. The elevator pitch for
Right.
for Measure the Future. So the idea with this project was that basically when I was still in an academic library, I was just fed up with statistics about the library that didn't give me sort of actionable data. Like it was interesting and there were, you could derive some things from it, but it didn't really, things like circ and reference interactions and, number of books, like, that doesn't tell me the sorts of things that I wanted to know in order to make differences in the way patrons utilize the library. And what I really wanted, I realized, was a sort of analytics for the space. I wanted something like Google Analytics or Piwik for the physical library building, right? Like I wanted to know, are people stopping at our new book display? Are people sitting in chairs for 18 hours, or are they, coming in for 2 minutes in order to charge up a phone? I wanted those sorts of, what is the space like? How do people move through it, and what are they sort of paying attention to? And so, Measure the Future was my attempt at trying to answer this question, and it's based on these sorts of movement analytics projects that have been around in the commercial world for a long time, like the things like big box stores, Walmart's, Walgreens, that sort of thing, have for a very long time analyzed how people move through space and what shelving units they use, and
Really?
how they when they stop at an end cap, which shelf do they touch first, and how many times do they touch an object before they buy it, and like all of those sorts of purchasing analytics have been around for a long time.
That's interesting. I knew that there was a lot of science about
Yeah.
studies about how people uh, shop, and
Yep.
that is directly impacting how these stores are built. But I
Yep.
didn't know that was so detailed. So
Oh
there
yeah.
are heat maps of people moving around Walmart and stuff. I didn't
Oh
know
yeah.
these were even things.
Oh yeah. No. There have been projects, commercially available products for many years, over a decade at least,
Huh.
that did both analysis of video analysis, right? So you have video cameras, you have security cameras, and you use those to do analysis after the fact. You record the video and then, do analysis of how people moved after the fact. Nowadays, you actually have shelf level sensors where you'll either have IR movement sensors, or in some stores even NFC, right, like RFID style
Crazy.
tagging movement of materials in spaces. So it's really detailed and really I mean, there's just enormous amounts of data, but it's also creepy as everything, because
Yeah.
the whole goal of these commercial systems are to tie purchasing behaviors to people and into individuals, right? Walmart tracks many, many, many pieces of things, and they're not the only one. I use them because they're a huge commonly available commercial entity, one of the few left in the U.S. But these sorts of stores track your phone, right? The Wi-Fi signal coming off of your phone, and they tie that to your movement around the building, and then track that to your credit card purchasing. So you get a complete picture of how people move, purchase, and how often they're in your store, how many times they come back a month, what their average purchasing is, what style shampoo they like, all of that. Like everything is captured.
This is terrifying, and this is without having a proper, setting up a proper account or a user profile.
Yeah, no. This is all based on either visual or your phone usually, right? The IMEI of your phone, the unique serial number of your phone.
Good Lord.
Yeah. So this sort of thing has been used a lot. But what I wanted was a system that wasn't creepy, right? Like a system that didn't go to the depths. Libraries don't want we don't want to sell you things. We don't want purchasing behaviors even, right? We don't want that sort of thing. But we do want to be able to know how people use the space in order to be able to then iterate on it and make it, more comfortable, better serve the things that patrons actually do. And to identify areas that aren't used, because often we have space. Space is a huge priority in libraries, and if we have spaces that are underused or underused in the way that we expect them to be, then changing them to better fit the patron use is really important. So that's the idea behind Measure the Future. And we looked at a bunch of different technologies when the project started. I looked at, Bluetooth and beacons and tracking people via Wi-Fi. There are lots of libraries that do this now. I mean, especially the Wi-Fi tracking in academic libraries is a fairly common sort of thing. There are places that use Wi-Fi as a sort of heat map for activity. I'm not a huge fan of those as sort of general data collection tools, because especially again, if you try to move that sort of data collection to a public library, you miss huge amounts of the people that I and I think others might care the most about, right? Like if you're basing your movement tracking or your activity tracking in a library on a cell phone, you miss people that don't have cell phones. And so you miss kids, you miss some teens, you miss people that simply can't afford a cell phone. You miss recent immigrants that might not have a cell phone yet. You just miss big swaths of the sort of people that public libraries are interested in. And so, I kind of ruled that out initially. And so what we ended up building for the project is a camera-based sensor. So it's a sensor that uses a standard webcam with a Raspberry Pi. Now, the current model uses a Raspberry Pi, and then a bunch of open source software underneath. And the way the sensor works is that it looks at a space and it basically tracks movement as pixels move, right? As pixels change on the camera sensor, it tracks those pixel changes and then records them to a database, and over time allows you to see the parts of your spaces that are, very, very active, the parts of your spaces that aren't active. It allows you to derive like how frequently do people stop at the, reference desk, how frequently do people stop at your new book display, how long on average do they spend in front of your shelves. All of that sort of data is then you can kind of derive that out of the data that we capture. I said camera, and that usually makes people a little nervous because we
I heard your
are.
deliberate choice of the word
Yeah,
pixels.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I was
yeah.
going to ask, is this tracking people's faces? You know,
Yep.
how you're, you had mentioned that you want to make something that's not creepy.
Yep. Yeah, so the camera it's a camera. We are intentionally not using it as a camera. It takes exactly one picture. When you do this setup of the system, when you do a setup of one of the sensors, you have to take a sort of background picture. That's a calibration image, effectively, right? So you take that with nobody in the picture. You just, because you want a picture of your space. And then after that, the system doesn't take pictures. It doesn't take video. It doesn't do any sort of identification of individuals. There's no recording of any sort of visual input. All it's doing is we're using that camera sensor to look for movement, to look for how pixels change. And so what's actually recorded, the data that gets recorded to the database, is the location, so XY coordinates on the initial image, and then timestamps. So this pixel changed at this time, and it was, it took this long to move this far. So you get movement and you get time, but you don't get images, pictures, people, any of that. So it's really about the space utilization, not about the people, not about the individuals, right? We don't want any of that.
Right.
As soon as you can identify people, it gets really dangerous, right? There's literal risk. And both for the library and for the people, right? Obviously, for the patrons. And so in order to minimize risk, the system is designed specifically to not do any of that. That does mean that we don't get the sort of robust things. We can't derive some things that more creepy systems could. If someone enters a space that has one of our sensors watching it and then exits the space and then enters the space again, we don't know it's the same person.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have any way of saying, like, Mary has been in this area twice, or person number 47 has been in this area twice, right? We're not doing any sort of deduplication of people,
right.
Again, because that increases risk of identity, right? Like, if you have that sort of data, it becomes easier to de-anonymize people, even without images. So we're not doing any of that. That does prevent us from knowing some things about the library that might be nice, but that's a deliberate choice on my part to try and make the data that we collect a little safer.
Well, I think that makes I think that makes the product more compelling. Donna Lanclo made a wonderful argument last month when I interviewed her, and of course she's quoting the works of others for creating a system and a service that deliberately doesn't track the stuff.
Yeah.
And of course now the news about Cambridge Analytica and you name it, at least temporarily put the wide public on their heels.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I'm fond of quoting Bruce Schneier on this front, who for a long time has described data as a toxic asset. That if you have it, eventually it will be dangerous, right? So it may not be dangerous right now, but the longer you have it, the longer the risk of the more the risk of it becoming dangerous. And so, what we don't have, we can't. We can't give away, we can't leak, we can't. So Measure the Future is designed from the get-go to be as private as we could figure out how to make it.
How has it been received so far?
So let me talk about a little bit about the kind of development, just so that you kind of see where, how we got where we are with the project. So we were originally funded by a Knight Foundation grant, which was fantastic. That was our very early funding to get everything going. From that, we produced an alpha product, and we tested that alpha in the New York Public Library, actually. Taught us a lot. One of the things an alpha test, especially of a new hardware and software product, will teach you is how broken it can be. And so, we sorted out what we learned from that and produced a beta project. We've been in beta for about a year at this point. And we've got seven at this point, beta partners who either have hardware or will have hardware from us. And those are collecting data, testing to make sure that the data answers the questions they want. We are part of the beta process has been both kind of to make sure that the sensors obviously just operating properly, right? That the data is being collected well, and that the data is accurate, and all of that. But part of the beta process has also been us on the development end, kind of pushing forward into the next stage. And the next stage of development is networking the sensors. Right now, the current beta sensors are all islands. They're all, they collect their data that they collect. They don't talk to each other. They don't talk to a central server. It's all
right.
hyper-local collection. And that's awesome for what we needed, which was we needed to make sure we wanted to verify that the data that we collected was safe. Right before we start throwing things around networks, and before we start any sort of widespread collection of data, I needed to be comfortable, frankly, that the data wasn't going to be dangerous. And so I'm fairly confident of that at this point. And so we're in the process of developing that networking setup so that the sensors will then throw the data at a visualization server that the libraries will have access to, and that they can then query and ask questions of. The biggest limit is right now of the current system is that because all of the data is only on the device, right, is only on the sensor. We're using Raspberry Pis, which are fantastic for what they do. They are great for our purposes, but when you start querying hundreds of thousands of data points and trying to ask questions of them, the Raspberry Pi is just going to melt. It just doesn't have the horsepower to do robust visualizations of very complicated data sets. And so some of the questions that I know the data can answer, or some of the visualizations that we can build, we haven't been able to make kind of happen robustly yet, because we need all of that data on a real server. We need to we need to throw it up into a server that actually has some metal behind it that we can use to really crunch on the numbers to do some things. I mean, some of the visualizations that I'm most excited about, we've just not been able to build yet. Things like, because we have data points that involve place and time, we can do sort of patterns of movement. Instead of just heat maps, we can actually literally watch people move around and get some patterns that emerge that way. You can ask both space and time query things like, for this space, like again, right in front of the reference desk, what's the average amount of time that anyone spends there? Does that change on Tuesday mornings or Wednesday mornings? Does that, right? Like, you can ask all sorts of interesting questions
based on the weather outside.
Yeah. You can start throwing all sorts of interesting things at that, and what I'm hoping is that we see some interesting questions, some interesting answers emerge from that. But we haven't quite got there yet, where that's the next step. And if you've ever built software is time frames and stuff are fuzzy. It's very, very hard to do accurate guessing as far as software. I had hoped we would be done now. I thought that kind of April, May was a good window for us. It looked like we were going to be somewhere in there. It looks like it's going to be later in the summer, June, July. But we're close. We're very close at this point.
Can you talk about your choice to license Measure the Future as a Creative Commons?
Sure. So, well, the Creative Commons applies to the the website and everything.
Just the website. All right.
Yeah. The project itself, all of the code on the project itself is actually GPL 3.
Okay.
So
yeah, you had mentioned that it was built on top of open source software, which I imagine has open source implications about what you're building as well.
Yep, it absolutely does. So we're everything we have built, everything we will build as far as the sensors and the data collection, all of that stuff is all open. It's all going to be open source. We're building on top of an open source stack. So the underlying software for all of the analysis we're doing is OpenCV, which is an open source computer vision library. Really fantastic. It has caused us some enormous heartache at times, but it's a great tool. And so because I believe in open source and I believe it's important for things to be open. Everything that we have a GitHub repository. Everything is up. Everything is open. It's all freely licensed. We chose GPL 3 intentionally to try and I know that there are holy wars waged over the type of open that people are. I made that choice specifically because I was a little concerned of a larger player repurposing some of our code for other reasons, and so GPL 3 protects a little bit from things getting locked down that way.
It would require that anything that they build on top of it would also have to be licensed GPL 3.
Openly. That's correct. Yeah, it's a viral license. So, from my perspective, that was it's my project, so I get to make those choices. But, that was why we went with that one. Was that to insist on it remaining free?
I have already been kind of daydreaming about the scenarios where larger vendors with a huge bankroll essentially create their own Measure the Future product, and then selling it, wherever it can. So here they can build off of yours, but it would require that
theirs would also have to be open.
And that's good. The argument for having open source, especially things that are open source that are responsible for protecting privacy, ensures that there are fewer holes.
Yeah. Well, and just audits. I mean, I've said this. I've said this a bunch of times in presentations I've given on Measure the Future. Is that one of the reasons that I wanted to make sure that this was open was that I am suggesting people put what looks like a camera, right? Like it's a camera, in their library to help understand the space. And I can say, trust me, all I like, but because it's open, if someone wants to verify that I'm not, that the system doesn't take pictures, it doesn't record video, they can do that. Like someone can sit down and look at the code and make sure that the system is doing what I say it's doing. And so that's important for me, right? If I were on the other side of the table and I was thinking about implementing this, I'd want a way to verify what someone was telling me. And so because the code is open, that opportunity is there for people.
Have you heard much interest from companies and other organizations that aren't library specific? This seems like it would have huge application. I don't know, you name it. Anything that has a physical space. Yeah,
the ones that I've had the most sort of kind of passing interactions with were the library the things that are library like, right? So other civic spaces, museum spaces, archive spaces, places like that. Anywhere where privacy is still a value that they hold, right? It's probably not going to be as useful for places where there is a commercial interest, because I'm not capturing data that they would want as a piece of their endeavor. So it is definitely going to be those spaces that have the sort of privacy first mentality that would be interested in something like this. So we'll see. I'm trying to make it a success in libraries first because it's the space I know, and it's the I understand the problem set a little more. If we were to try to implement something like this in, say, a healthcare situation, like I just don't know the problem set, right? I don't know what the likely outcomes would be, even though they're a privacy centered. They may need some of the same sort of space analysis stuff. It's just not an area that I know well enough to kind of go there right now, at least.
I wonder if there's any place on your roadmap, however distant in the future, where you have essentially a Measure the Future kit that is just pop up, where folks like me in a design consultancy can just say like, hey, we want to watch this space for 100 days,
Yeah.
and it's easy to put up ourselves, and then
Yep.
like hook up to one of your services and then pull down.
Yep. I absolutely, one of the things that I would love to get to is exactly that sort of like, we just need a 30-day sample of
Yeah.
this space, right? Like, we just want to see what this space looks like for 30 days. We're going to capture the data. We can pour through the data afterwards and stuff, right? Like we can dump the data and we can play with it, but we need, we need to do this capture. And so, yeah, totally that sort of thing, especially for, architecture firms, for,
Right.
like all of that sort of space. There's a lot of opportunities there. I've talked with a couple of architects about it, for that sort of, we're renovating this space in a year.
Mm-hmm.
We'd love to know how people are using it right now. Um,
Cool.
so that I think there's a lot of potential there. One of my hopes is I think there's a couple of different levels that I hope happen as this kind of grows. One is, we have a lot of beliefs about our spaces in libraries. Like we live there, right? Like people live, the staff, the librarians, like we're there. We see our patrons every day. Like we probably have pretty good ideas about how the spaces are being used. At the same time, like humans are terrible eyewitnesses. Like
Sure.
we infer, we fill in gaps, we just make mistakes about what we see, but we're terrible. Like we have, there's lots of evidence about how bad people are at noticing things. And so, while I would love both to see some of our anecdotal beliefs, verified, right? Like I'd love for Measure the Future to be used to gather data that shows, like, look at this, we have numbers and we were right about this. I also think that there are going to be times probably where our beliefs are challenged a little bit by the data that we capture and by how people are really using our space. But I think both of those are super exciting because it means that we can make the space better for our patrons. Like in both cases, we get the benefit of being able to improve how people, are comfortable in our space, how people use the space, to what they need. We can test the spaces. I love the idea. Like one of the things I'm super excited about is A/B testing spaces in the same way that we like A/B test websites. Like
Yeah.
I would love to have a place like put some furniture in, measure for 30 days and then swap everything around and measure for 30 days and see what sort of effect it has on numbers and on time spent in the space and, all of that sort of thing. Like there's just, there's some super interesting studies that can be done. And, I'm really excited about the potential. I've got to get like the part of the challenge with any project is, I mentioned early on, we were grant funded for the alpha. So, that was a huge benefit and it got us up to the alpha. But at this point we're bootstrapping it, right? Like the beta partners that I'm working with are helping to fund the development of it. But Yeah, so the funding model right now, the beta partners are helping to fund the further development of it. But that's bootstrapping is hard. Like there's no steady funding for this project right now. So I see all this potential in, like, I want to run, but we're having to sort of very carefully crawl our way to the next stages.
Is it possible that individuals could donate? Is that I'm just kind of hitting up the site.
Yeah, we haven't gotten. I have not. I haven't done that yet. I'll say that the individual donations I haven't done. I haven't done any of that yet. We're not obviously we're not a nonprofit or anything like that, and it wasn't comfortable just kind of going that route just yet, but
like
kickstarting or anything like that. Yeah, I mean, I did a Kickstarter for the Library Box project, which was really successful and actually quite fun, like to do. Doing some sort of a crowdfunding thing for Measure the Future feels like it might be a possibility at some point, but I would love, maybe if there are any librarians listening that work at R1s and really want a really fun measurement tool to do some studies with, come see me. We can write a grant together. One of the things that has kept me going on this project is that there really is just nothing else out there right now, right? Like, if you want to do this sort of study of your space, there is no automated way to do it this is it, really. So I feel like there's a lot of potential value here. And so I'm going to keep plugging away at it. We'll be if everything keeps moving the way it's moving now, we'll have the kind of next step. The next kind of software release will be, sometime over the summer, at which point we'll have that central visualization server set up going. That actually makes scaling much easier. Yeah. when we, the distributing sensors and things becomes a lot more straightforward when all the data is moving to a central server. So that will actually help the project quite a bit when we can get to that point. So we're close.
The final thought that I have, and then I'll give it to you for any kind of final words. I'm going to edit that sentence a little bit later. Yeah. Is that I think it's exciting years down the road, maybe not, hopefully not years, but to see whether or not Measure the Future turns out to be profitable. You mentioned that you're not nonprofit, and I imagine that is intentional. You're trying to make this a service in the business. If a privacy conscious data tracking tool turns out to be profitable, this is going to be an example for other organizations or groups who want to get into the space to demonstrate that, gosh, you don't have to track everything to make money.
Yeah.
And I think that's a signal that needs to be heard and demonstrated more widely as well. Because right now everyone's looking at Cambridge Analytica, and while folks are scared, they're like, what a super rich company. Gosh.
They did make a lot of money. They made a lot of money.
Library vendors, they see those dollar signs too.
Yeah,
and
totally.
And vendors that serve other nonprofits who are themselves for profit, these learning analytics systems, these are all are in dire need of hearing like a positive message that, ethical data tracking is a thing.
Yeah, I'm trying. I can't build anything that I don't that I wouldn't use. Like I can't. Like, that's one of the reasons I'm in libraries to begin with, right? Like, I'm a technologist. I could be doing other things. I'm in libraries because I believe in the mission and because I believe in the ethics and the goals of the library. And so I'm going to build tools that kind of uphold those. And I believe strongly that there's a market for it and that it can be a sustainable business. I joked a couple of times during presentations that I'm the worst business person. I'm a decent technologist, and I think I'm an okay librarian. I'm a terrible business person because my plan is to build everything and then give it away and hope people pay me.
That's could be proprietary, Jason.
Yeah, I was going to say this is. It's a terrible business plan, but at the same time, it's the only one that makes sense in this space. Like, I don't believe that closed systems make sense in libraries or I mean in any civic space, in any like public civic arena. Like I think, again, ethically, philosophically, um, I, I just believe so strongly in this. That's the thing I'm going to build. And so either it's going to be sustainable, which I think it will, or it won't, and I'll find that out.
How can people get a hold of you and hit you up about Measure the Future, whether or not they want to participate or just like throw you money or signal boost?
Yep, absolutely. So I am at jasongriffey.net. You can find kind of all of my different projects. This is one thing I work on. I have a handful of others.
They're very busy.
Well, I keep myself busy. Yes, I also do technology consulting for libraries, and so if anyone wants to talk to me about that, you can also find information at jasongriffey.net. Measure the Future itself is at measurethefuture.net. There is a link at the top for that says beta, and you can get all of the information from how to become a beta partner, kind of what that looks like, how to build your own sensor if you're interested in playing with the project yourself, links to our code and GitHub, and then contact links are all on both sites to get in touch with me directly.
Thanks a million for making the time. This is super interesting. I'm glad we could kind of dig into it.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for giving me the opportunity, Michael. I always like talking to you.